I am thrilled to see all of you back here and not taking naps. We've had a lot of information, wonderful information fed to us throughout the course of this day, as well as wonderful food fed to us. So thank you for being here and thank you for being awake. And if you do drop off, it's not a problem. I will just have your neighbor wake you up. So we are going to take questions from the audience. I have one to begin with, just to get us started, and then we will continue on. So, my friends, spiritual responsibility is something that each of you touched on in some way during your sharing or talk. Would you comment on this topic in a very practical way? That is, practically speaking, what are some actions we can take, both in our inner lives or in our outer lives, that help us shoulder this responsibility to humanity?
So, as I understand this philosophy, the more that you are being inwardly receptive to the promptings of the soul and the wisdom of the soul and the content of the causal body, the more there will be a gradual sense of responsibility, because you're actually being responsible for serving the inner ashram that your soul is a member of. As I mentioned in my talk earlier, that your soul is an agent on behalf of an inner ashram according to your ray type. And so the more soul alignment you have and awareness of the soul, the more the subtle patterns of a sense of purposeful responsibility begin to color your thinking. And increasingly and naturally, you will begin to think about more of what can you bring forward in terms of the betterment of humanity to make an uplifting contribution to something beyond yourself. And so it's a natural outgrowth of the spiritual journey itself. And that leads to, in terms of the practical aspects of it, it's not something that you necessarily have to choose, where am I going to do that? It's actually evident in the experiences of day-to-day life. Everywhere you are, every circumstance you're in is a place where service and upliftment can be offered. So spiritual service and the sense of responsibility shouldn't be viewed as a selective process. It should be a way of living. It's to live a life of demonstration. So I hope that gives some understanding to it.
Thank you.
Yes, more or less on the same lines, I would say, look at what situation life brought you to, and then try to apply these principles there. If you are an educator, then think how what you do can help produce a change or more awareness, or etc. Or if you are a householder, well, see how you can apply those principles in that particular situation, how you raise your kids or your relationship with your spouse, the neighbors. I think where life puts us is part of our dharma, and that's where we have to think, am I just going through life seeking for what I like, or how can I contribute something? In my case, when choosing to do a talk, I could give talks on things that I'm interested in, but maybe are not interesting or necessary for other people. Or I can choose, okay, what can I say that may contribute to what we are seeking. So each one in its own place has to think in those terms. How can I give a little contribution, make a little contribution for this change and help?
So if we start to talk about responsibility, then we have start to think what we should do in life to be in accordance with the universal ethics. And I would say a natural, normal life should be in conformity, in compliance with this natural cosmic order. Because if we don't follow this principle, after some time, everything will go wrong. And I think that probably it is the the state of the earth now, because we have not acted correctly according to the universal ethics. But I would be in the general lines, because I am reluctant to give advices in the responsibility how to do it. I think that we are quite mature to decide what we should do in certain circumstances. And life is always unexpected. I mean that we cannot give principles of how to act, and generally we learn the lesson. And when life continues to be real life, when things happen, and then you can what to do and what it is absolutely difficult. So every time when something happens, it's just the principle to be reminded: am I in accordance, in compliance with what is right in the universal order? And then for the practical, everyone has to decide.
How do we, for example, Kim, I'm going to take your statement. How do I, who understand the cosmic law, who tries desperately to adhere to the first object, how do I take that, and what should motivate me to take that to the social institutions and agencies that are outside of me, and say, look, we can't continue to have the kinds of stuff going on with the LGBTQ, transgender group, the racial injustices that are happening rampantly now. And I could keep going. How would you address going outside of yourself? Because we're so reticent to be happy with ourselves because we're doing the right thing.
I can start. I think if we are theosophists, then we have to think outside the box. And we have to think in terms of human happiness. So we may be theosophists and support one policy or the other. We may be for abortion or against abortion. But whatever position we are, we need to think of suffering in general. So I may think, okay, abortion is not good, but what happens if I just ban abortion with those mothers which we know are going to get an abortion now illegally? Or if I'm pro-abortion, then we have to think, how can we do to reduce abortion and to educate people so that they don't have to be at that point? So with every issue, we may have different political positions with everything, whether we want a bigger government or a smaller government. But as a theosophist, we have to see how our view can be enacted in a way where we reduce suffering. Cruelty, no matter what party we belong to, cruelty is not theosophical. Brotherhood is theosophical, or kinhood, or humankind. Now, you can have any political, cultural, social position, but think of the overall suffering. That's what I would say.
Your question is very profound, despite the fact that it is, in appearance, it is just a social issue. It is very profound, because what makes a society? Individuals. So every time we have a problem, we will say this institution, this the society, human society. But no, the problem is inside the humans. We have produced this society, and how to rectify, how to modify, how to make it improve. We cannot improve the society because all the experiments we have tested, we have tried, failed. We want to have a kind of revolution of this, reformation of this. It fails because we have missed the point. The point is that if you want to absolutely make a revolution for the society in which you are living, I mean the human society, the aim is at individuals. We have to make the individual think and be responsible, decide for themselves. Of course, always with the respect of freedom, because you cannot impose something that you think is right to make people comply. But encourage them to think freely, meaning that when they have a touch upon freedom of themselves, they will have this consciousness of the freedom of the others. Freedom is, as I said, it is the first characteristic of consciousness. You cannot ignore it. And when you touch upon it, you will see you have your own freedom to decide. You cannot say, I have the freedom, the power of freedom. No, freedom is not a power. Freedom is just the nature, essential nature of consciousness. So when you touch upon freedom, you are in touch with consciousness itself. So when you are at that point, you don't have any notion of power or imposing your own point of view over the others. But when you respect their freedom, you have also the role of a kind of orientator, not yet educator. What Pablo just said is really the essential of being an educator. And we as Theosophists, we can be kind of educator. I would think that we should be also at the same time orientator, meaning that we oriented the thinking in a way so that educators can apply and do their job practically in the social continuum. But they should have some orientation for that. And this orientation is a teaching of the Theosophical Society, I mean in Theosophy. And we have to get to this point to have the correct understanding so that we could share with people what is what. And we cannot speak out of the blue, say that it is right for you. Well, it is right for me, but for you, what is the right thing? You have to discover it. But if you, when you on the road of discovery of this, you have to study and to understand yourself. I mean, the job cannot be done by somebody else. It is like the cooking is done even nicely, but you have to take the food from the pot to your mouth. This cannot be done by somebody else. Okay?
Thank you.
So
Thank you. William, did you want to respond, or?
I can give a short response
Sure.
on that too. So, well, one of the things that I focus on is the idea that when you're looking at something in the outer world and there's an issue that you may agree with or disagree with, I agree with Pablo in the sense that this is not about deciding who's right and who's wrong, but in the esoteric understanding of things, a thought form, an attitude, a perspective is an entity in itself. It's a living being. Thoughts are alive, and thoughts are dual, just like you and I. Every concept, every idea has a soul quality to it and an outer garment of form called personality. And so this, as I used with my example of the talk I did and the Antichrist thing I mentioned earlier, the same is true with every thought. Every thought is a mixture of darkness and light. And you can't really start a conversation with another person who views something in a different way unless you can look deep into that perspective and see if you can sense the soul, or what I often call in my writings, the sacred principle at the core of the thing you disagree with. What is the soul of the thing you disagree with? Because that soul quality, which is a spiritual principle, for instance, is a soul quality. That quality is what you want to first find. And then you want to approach that by reaching into, with your language, reaching into and touching, recognizing that, languaging in such a way that they recognize that you sense the soul of their position. And you lift that attitudinally and perspectively in honor. And then hold that while you begin to shape other forms for how that quality, that sacred quality, can be brought forward in a constructive, uplifting way to others. So, and it is said that the only way you can do that is to recognize, number one, it's one of the functions of the third eye. I mentioned the third eye helps you see the soul in all things. It helps you see the soul in all perspectives as well. What is the soul, and what is what I sometimes call the outer shell of form that is trying to represent that spiritual quality at the core. And the only way you can really utilize that approach is you must suspend judgment immediately when you enter into it. You can't hold an attitude of right or wrong. You see, when you rapid judgment is said to immediately close the third eye. And once that happens, you're out of the game. You're going to be completely ineffective. So my view is always look deeper into the issue and the person and their perspective, and try to first sense what is the sacred principle that they are holding at the core, even though you may disagree with the outer presentation of that principle in the outer world. So you start from commonality, you might say, a deeper soulful connection, and then work out from there. Okay?
Thank you so much. Gwen, I think, was next.
I want to address the burning chaos going on around us right now, and the duality that permeates. And you hit a note of my vulnerability about going back into the fire and helping pull out or pull forward. Because in my own personhood, I can see ahead. But I see chaos and burning where others are ignoring. It isn't even a matter of judgment or discernment, because there is none. It is just chaotic. And I'm from Texas, so it's 10 times chaotic, okay? I have learned to come from the heart only. It's the only way I can deal with it. My heart can go back into the fire, but my head goes crazy. I cannot wrap my head around any of the chaos. So I really want to know while we're all going through that, because we're in a lovely place here. We're with people who are loving and caring, and we're going back out into a world that is not so much so. And it used to be where you could pick your battles, and now it's burning. So how do you approach that? One easy answer.
Whoever wishes to go first may.
I will take
Okay,
it.
you go.
Yeah. This is typical of the soul. You use the term soul. We have to define it a little bit, because in the teachings of theosophy, it should be very, very precise. And you use the term, there is a kind of desperate feeling when you are living inside a kind of chaotic world. But it is not your thing. It is not specific for Texas. I would agree that Texas is a very special region.
I would agree.
But your feeling of really desperation is common to humans. We have to pass through all this. The state of suffering, to be absolutely in despair, because we have to go out of this. And even, I mentioned it for some expert of the secret doctrine here, Madame Blavatsky said that even the highest archangel has to come back here to learn the lesson. The lesson of, we have to learn the lesson of choice, to go beyond it. And the choice is, you want to suffer, you don't want to move forward, to go beyond your suffering, so stay there, by this side. And if you have the willingness and the will to go further, meaning move on, it is always to move on. You cannot stand at this place and say, oh, God, help me. God helps everyone, but not those who are immobile. Move. And when you do it, you move out of your despair. And perhaps, very likely you will find out the way out. And this is, at the same time, almost impossible way to find, and almost the easiest thing to find, depending upon your mind, how to you catch it, how you are attentive to that.
I think I so understand what you're saying, and it's got to be really even more challenging in Texas, no question. I'm reminded of something that Pablo said in his speech earlier today about the challenges around kama manasic consciousness, desire mind. And as he rightly said, people who are at that level of their evolutionary development are kama manasic. And so, as he said, you can't reason with them. You can't reason with people like that because desire and emotional bias is so strong that it's the motivating factor that shapes their mental perspectives. And so, and that can be terribly frustrating because you've got insight, you've got a deeper understanding of something, and you want to convey it, but they're not able to hear it because of that bias. And it can make us feel really frustrated as well as a result of that. But I think it's important to always remember that those are people that are at a particular place in the pyramid of evolution, and that each one of us in some previous incarnation must have been there too. And each one of us must have needed that step. That's a necessary step in the journey. So people are, as frustrating as it is, people are actually behaving exactly how they are behaving because that's where they are and need to behave that way. And so there's a kind of acceptance of that, and again, it helps you suspend undue judgment. I often think about the born-again Christian, and and I've got a family of them. I got 3 brothers; they're all born-again Christians, and I'm the devil. Okay, but I used to get in conflict with them until I realized that I must have been a born-again Christian sometime too. I must have gone through that phase of development too. And so when that shift took place in me, suddenly I became much more patient with them and tried to find a way of finding again what is the thing that we agree upon. What are the underlying principles of their perspective? And I need to reach into those principles and hold it, kind of like what I said just a minute ago, and work from there outward. And I find that I have much more success. And even though they may not they may not agree with you, their response tends to be very softened. I found that when I was combative with my fundamentalist brothers, there was no gain. But if I found the places where their essence of truth and spoke that way, then their need to attack and defend diminishes. And it's just honoring a difference of opinion. That's what it is. But again, I go back to the idea that find the deeper truth in the study of white magic, which is somewhat of what I'll be doing in my workshop. There's the so-called rules of white magic, and there's a rule number 14 actually that talks about the what are called the ancient fires. The ancient fires is the power inherent in old ideas, and those ancient fires are really rising up today and asserting themselves. And the only way you can address the ancient fires as they come up and present themselves is to do what I said earlier, to suspend judgment, find the essence of truth within the ancient fire, and work out from there. So in a way, my answer to this question is the same answer I gave earlier. So, okay.
Thank you, William. Pablo?
Just briefly, I think what you said when is important to, to respond with the heart as opposed the head in that sense. Just like in that quote from the Voice of the Silence, the first step is to live to benefit humanity. The second, to practice, the virtues. Krishnamurti often would warn against the ideals because we can become very violent and insensitive when we follow or push our ideals. We know we have killed many people in the name of God or whatever God of any religion. So when dealing with people, we have to come to them from the heart, again, focusing on their suffering, because that's the reality. All the rest is a reaction to their suffering, and not from the ideal. If we come from our theosophical ideal, we may become insensitive, violent, just as other people are. So you come from the heart. Now, we have to disengage our inner personal attitude when dealing with individuals, and what we may do at a bigger level, like if you are involved in any politics or activist group or something, you act on the lines that you think that are right. But then you deal with the individuals from the point of view of love and understanding. So don't let your head, ideas, views of what is right and wrong come in the way. Otherwise, we are doing the same as everybody else.
Thank you, Pablo.
The way I understand suffering is that there's an end to it, or that there's a path to the end to it. And there's been a lot of information here. And like when I Google anything, there's a lot of information, and it's hard to sort through. And that breeds doubt for me, speaking from my experience. So I'm curious, as if I was 5, like I'm not learned as you framed me, or us. If a 5-year-old walked up to you and said, I'm experiencing self-doubt, how would you tell a 5-year-old to be outrageously courageous in the face of self-doubt? And with that, I'll remain teachable.
I will say that a 5-year-old may not call it self-doubt, but 5-year-olds certainly have self-doubt.
Amen.
So, any of you
Anyone
want
wants-
to jump up to this is a tough one. Go.
I think something that I like very much that Annie Besant says is that when we are trying to inspire or help somebody, we should help them from the point where they are and not from the point where we are. So this applies to our friends that may be fundamentalists, etc. So if we try to give them an ideal that is just out of their grasp, it's not going to work. So we need to be sensitive to what that person is, where that person is at, and then try to give them something that may help them take their next step, the step that they can take in the right direction, and not more than that. So, we may individually be against the idea of a personal God, but if you destroy the idea of a personal God to a person that cannot conceive something higher, you left that person with less than that person had after your encounter. So the same, in this example of a 5-year-old, you have to see what will inspire that kid to take the next step. And it may be worshiping a personal God or his or her parents or, whatever it is that you may think, there are higher things. Well, no, try to be sensitive to what that person needs and give just what that person needs.
Thank you. Do either of you want to jump in, or it's up to you.
Well, I can make a comment, but you should know that I have no children myself, so I'm speaking from a lack of parental experience, but at least in this incarnation. But what comes to my mind with that question is, assuming that you as a parent have a 5-year-old who's struggling with self-doubt, and assuming that you as a parent are a parent that 5-year-old really admires, and that you're almost like a god to them, I would think that one of the ways to approach it is to share with them times in your life when you were a small child where you were doubtful, and let them know that there are times in life where these sorts of things happen, but you have you have an exit at the other end. In other words, look, I came through that, and I know you will too. And you highlight the things that are special about them. Recognize why are they special? What are they good at? But also just help them recognize that here they admire you so much, and you are acknowledging that when you were a child, you had times when you were struggling too, and even share those experiences, so that it helps them to see that even though they're having that self-doubt now, you're evidence that this is only temporary and that there's hope for the future.
Thank you. Kim-Dieu, would you want to?
To know a little bit about himself and not only watch the doubt he has, because every drawback or every suffering has a history in the past. So you have to know a little bit about his past in order to help him.
Thank you. And can I just add one quick thing? Since I work with 5-year-olds who have self-doubt.
She's the one that knows what she's talking about. We are.
So yeah, it's very complicated, but from my perspective, it's a matter of going back and saying, so tell me about you. What are some of your strengths? What are you good at? And having the child come up with that, and then even write them down or color them in some way and say, look at all these things that you can do. Look at how wonderful you are and how strong and brave. That makes it real to the child. So when we struggle with self-doubt, we can do the same thing for ourselves as adults. So, well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate everything everybody has said, but I'm going back to a more fundamental question that my mind wrestles with on a daily basis. When I see pure evil, and evil is succeeding, I wrestle in my head how to combat that so I can move on, because that is a question. I'm a student of World War II. That was pure evil that occurred. I am seeing some of the same rhetoric, some of the same response, and the success of that response. What is a theosophical interpretation of evil or the lack of good, and how can it be explained so people like me can move on, because we're perplexed and it's keeping us in a cycle?
I understand what you say, and I share the feelings, but let me say first that the idea of pure evil is dangerous, because that will make us insensitive to the other, and that's actually how we can do terrible things to each other, because we interpret and label the other as pure evil. So that in itself is a dangerous idea, although I know the feeling that you are saying. But also, perhaps we should study more history, because a lot of things that are happening today were kind of normal 100 years ago. It's not that bad. Of course, it's bad for what we want. I'm not trying to minimize any of this. I am concerned. But, look back 100 years, look back 200-300 years. We have gone through this. So the reason why I mention this is because we can act more effectively if internally we are, with more balance. The two wars in Europe, of course, were terrible. Those bodies were killed, the souls reincarnate, and we continue. We have killed each other many times, and we continue. And we have learned from that. From that terrible suffering, Europe lived a period of peace that had never seen in its whole history. Unfortunately, we are still learning through suffering. So if we in the world are having wrong views, how are we going to come to a point where we say these views cannot be sustained any longer? Only after we have suffered enough, unfortunately. So this is our decision collectively, but the problems that are happening right now is what we are choosing so that we can have this collective realization that we cannot continue this way. How much suffering will be enough? We don't know. Hopefully it's as little as possible, but this is how we grow as a soul. So always remember what Krishna told Arjuna when he was in the middle of the war. He had to kill his friends, teachers, because this was a war within a kingdom. And he said, how can I do this? And Krishna said, you suffer for what you should not suffer. You can only kill bodies. The souls are eternal. And of course, this is not just a blank chart. What do you say? Go ahead and kill people. Of course not. But keep your eyes on what is eternal and try to help reduce the suffering as much as possible down here. But the eternal is eternal. It continues to grow. Even if we destroy our civilization, as we have done so many times in the past, we'll come back and rebuild it. So from that point of view, maybe we all can have a more balanced inner attitude, and then, of course, do our best so that we don't have to go to those extremes. That's my approach.
Thank you. Kim-Dieu?
Yes, I will try to say something. I think that it is all legitimate that you have this big worry of this notion of evil. But now, theosophically speaking, we can read in some Mahatma letters that 2/3 of the evil would come from selfishness of the humans. Please read the letter. I cannot develop it here. And this is one thing, meaning that we are part of the results. We are creating things there. And moreover, you see people when they go somewhere and they will kill each other, it is not that it is really their will. Somewhere they have been manipulated. This is why Theosophy really insists upon think by yourself. Think before acting. Think, because if you don't, there are so many institutions, organizations will try to manipulate you. And among them, of course, the one you have mentioned many times. Now, I would like to say also that in the whole world of the manifested, I have understood that there is nothing like black and white. There is something, a mingling of things. And when we call evil or separately God, we are separate things in black and white. At a certain moment, there is another writer, a Kabbalist, called Eliphas Levi, who was the contemporary of Blavatsky. When he was asked, what is the evil? What is Satan? He said, just the shadow of God. So they are linked together in such a way that you have to distinguish, and when there is a discernment of what is the divine, the shadow disappears. there is no evil then.
Thank you. William?
Yeah, that reminds me of, that saying that evil is the inner lining of God's garment. I think when I think about that subject of evil, I always, in my mind, see it as two types of evil. So because I think we too loosely use that word, evil, and I think, as Pablo said, it's dangerous to overemphasize the word because we have all of these really, really dark elements to it. That's not to say that there isn't something called evil, but I think what we have to understand is that most things that people call evil are what I would call natural evil as opposed to unnatural evil. So let me explain what I mean by that. Natural evil is what I would, a way of defining it, it's a manifestation of the good that has outlived its usefulness. The good that has outlived its usefulness. The ideas that at one time were good and progressive are now regressive. It's that prison I talked about. And that's built into the very fabric of how human evolution works, is that we do become captured by old ideas that actually become more antithetical to the betterment of our humanity over time. And that's natural evil. And it happens with all of us too. Each of us there's parts of our personality that are yet unredeemed by the soul, and those we could say that the resisting tendencies of or attitudes we have that are in opposition to our higher nature, those we could call manifestations of natural evil. And I would say by far the largest darkness out there that we see is a manifestation of natural evil wrongly being claimed as being the darker kind of evil from a darker force. That's point one. Point two is that in this philosophy there is this other kind of evil that is exploitive of natural evil. There's a whole, sometimes it's called the dark lodge or the antithetical lodge. That is really the antithetical force of the white lodge. That is to say, there's a whole hierarchy of entities or life on this planet that is in opposition to the white brotherhood. And that lodge has a very strong vested interest in influencing, in inflaming natural evil beyond its real intensity, because, as I said earlier, humanity is walking a burning ground as a test to take the first initiation. And what's the first initiation? Humanity is trying to figure out how to be one. And a lot of shadow issues and natural evil interpretations are arising to the surface. And that lodge that I'm speaking of, this darker lodge, senses that the ashrams are trying to externalize, and goodness is trying to get a deeper hold on humanity. And there's and the reappearance of the Christ is another element that you can be sure that the Dark Lodge is aware of. And so there's a heightened effort right now to inflame that and try to accent behaviors that emphasize separateness. And I'm reminded of what the Tibetan had said about this. He said one of the greatest obstacles to humanity's future is what he called the heresy of separateness, which also Pablo brought forth, the heresy of separateness. And that heresy is being inflamed by a much darker energy than just natural evil. But as I say, it's heightening, it's amplifying natural evil. And but according to Joel Kuhl, you and I can't deal with that higher kind of evil. That's way beyond us. The masters themselves are trying to address that. We have to focus on what can we do to transform the natural evil within ourselves, and by extension, looking for understanding natural evil in the outer world. How do we help people recognize that the thought forms they are holding at one time had merit and are now holding us all back? And it's very difficult right now. It's very difficult, and I think we have to actually bring certainly the Christ within ourselves into every situation in a non-judgmental way. In the end, the deepest truth is a truth that the Christ holds, that the soul in you holds, and that John Lennon holds. All you need is love. All you need is love.
I love that. All you need is love. I love that. I think Pablo has
Yeah.
a brief comment.
Just coming back to the question of evil, I think one problem we have when considering this is our Christian background, where we tend to think that evil is something that should not be there, that is out of nature. If you see in the Mahatma letters, the masters call the Dugpas, or the brotherhood of the dark side, they call them the brothers of the shadow. And there is a chapter in Annie Besant's book, The Spiritual Life, that is called The Meaning of Evil. And she shows there how evil is an evolutionary force. We evolve by following goodness, and we evolve by resisting evil. When there is no evil, there is very little evolution. This is what happens in the Golden Age. The Golden Age is a very slow evolving time because there is very little evil. So when you think of evil in the world, don't forget that this is an evolutionary force, and that it's not something that should not be there. Of course, eventually we won't need it, but it's part of how we grow.